Can a Catholic vasectomy get married? The Ordinary Magisterium in 1977 said yes. However, nature says no. So how is this possible? Because NFP says willful sterility is nature. Therefore, willful vasectomy must also be accepted as nature. You're going to need to watch this video till the end so we can untangle this mess and get all the loose ends tied back together to get down to what is Catholic. I'm John Farrell, your NFP spiritual dictator, and this is Annulment Proof.
2 little treasures we have got, but 3 of them would be a lot. For the second time we'll tie the knot. It's part of Snippy Snappy. Ooh, hey,
it's gone pretty mainstream with the effect of NFP. What do you expect? The vasectomies are all over the place, and so nowadays the trend, as you've figured out, is to accommodate the world versus saying what's right and wrong. There's a bunch of that, and this is no exception. And I was always scratching my head about this vasectomy stuff. Like, why is it kind of okay, and what happened in 1977 that made it okay? How could this happen? Anyway, we're gonna get into the nuts and bolts of it, and like I said, I want you to watch the end of this video. It's going to take us that long to tie up all the little pieces, okay, so we can get it straight. The devil is in the details with this vasectomy stuff, really is. And I spent some time combing through it, and I'm here to present it so we can all be on the same page and all be Catholic, because Catholics cannot agree to disagree. All right, now let's get right to the facts. Just the facts, ma'am. All right, so let's read the 1977 CDF decree giving us the thumbs up for getting married with a vasectomy, okay? Decree regarding cases in which impotence renders marriage null. And we know that impotence does render marriage null. So let's read further. The Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine CDF always held that those who have undergone vasectomy and those who find themselves in similar circumstances such that their impotency is not established with certainty are not impeded from marriage. All right, we have to parse these words a little bit. This is very short, but we got to get it straight, as usual. Okay, so they're saying, look, we're not changing anything, because we've always held that those who have undergone vasectomy, but we don't, just like those who experience divorce, who have undergone a divorce, who have gone through a divorce, there's a guilty party and an innocent party depending on what's happened, okay? When you've undergone a vasectomy, there's a guilty party and an innocent party. If the vasectomy was forced on you, you're innocent. You could get married because you didn't willfully neuter yourself. But if the vasectomy was not forced on you and you did it for the reason of sterility, you are impeded from marriage. So it depends on how you got there. And we have the same problem today with divorce, like I said. Divorce does not bar one from the sacraments. Well, it depends on who the guilty party is. There's one guilty and one innocent in every separation. Okay, so those who find themselves in similar circumstances, it just happened. We don't know how it happened. It just happened. In other words, some kind of sterilization. Their impotency is not established with certainty. Okay, even if it is established with certainty, you're not impeded from marriage if you didn't do it to yourself, okay? If you didn't do it willfully. So this is just another wrinkle. It kind of adds more confusion, if you ask me. I'll get back to this purple thing in a minute. Oh, yeah, well, I guess I already mentioned it, that this is. I asked AI, what did the 1977 decree address? It says it did not address. Okay, what did it not address extensively before 1977? Because the decree says we have always held this. Voluntary vasectomies for contraception. There is no substantial record of the Holy Office giving private replies before 1977 about men who chose vasectomy to prevent procreation. So there's my point. If it happened involuntarily, like you were in the war, something gotcha, or the Nazis did stuff to you, okay, you could still get married because you did not willfully choose sterilization, but you do have a right to get married if you can if you can perform the act. Okay, now this is back to the decree. Furthermore, having examined this position after repeated studies conducted by the CD Sacred Congregation for the Commission, and for the revision of the Code of Canon Law. So they're getting a little bit of the love wins stuff going on because the new Code of Canon Law in the 70s was kind of law. And how should I put this? After Vatican II, that was effectively canon law, effectively. And people kind of ignored the old code, and they're going with, they're feeling the love in the room, all right? So the cardinals and bishops, members of this sacred blah, 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 1977. Okay. Proposed respond to the following doubts. Whether the impotence that renders a marriage, I'm going to turn this heater off. Whether the impotence that renders a marriage null consists in the antecedent and perpetual incapacity, whether absolute or relative, to complete the conjugal act. And the answer is yes. So let's just, again, this is so short, we got to talk about all of this. Whether the impotence that renders a marriage null, so you can't be impotent, consists in the previous or perpetual incapacity, whether absolute or relative, to complete the conjugal act. If you can't complete the conjugal act, you can't get married, okay? It makes it null. But just as a side note here, whether absolute or relative, this is totally weird, because if you can't consummate your marriage, you can't consent to it. So what is consummation? Well, it can be relative. You can consummate your marriage with somebody, but you can't consummate them with your particular spouse. This is why you can get annulments over and over and over and keep getting remarried like Rose Sweet, because it's relative to the person. I can't consummate my soulmateness with this person. This is more of the love wins ideology, which is infected law. While we're talking about this, we can talk about consummation. It's right here at the bottom, and I'll come back. Okay, here, check this out. So I did ask a canon lawyer about how do you consummate the marriage, or what nowadays after good of the spouses is required for validity. How do you consummate it? Okay, this is Cecilia Brennan, canon lawyer, Monterey, California. All right. She says in an email, the good of the spouses is specifically an object of marriage as defined in the Canon 1055 of the new Code of Canon Law. So the object of marriage has changed. It's now good of the spouses. Hear that, all you vasectomies out there? You don't have to have babies anymore. You just have good of the spouses. And if this brings about good, it's cool. This is why it's going on. All right. Now, so the good of the spouses is now an object of marriage. It didn't used to be, but it is now. Okay, because love wins, and is lived out, achieved, accomplished, consummated in its being lived out throughout the marriage. Okay, so the good of the spouses is the community of the whole of life, which means you share toothbrushes and combs and dental floss and everything. Right. Whole of life, emotional struggles, everything. It takes a lifetime to consummate good of the spouses. So there's that. That's why it's relative. So if you break up, you couldn't consummate with your good of the spouses so you might be able to consummate with someone else, okay, but just not with that person. That's why you can keep getting annulments over and over and over. So that was a little side note. Like I said, you got to watch to the end of the video. We got to get to all of it so we can put this thing to bed. This 1977 ruling, which somehow pulls the wool over our eyes and says, no, vasectomy is now nature, because, as you know, marriage is an office of nature. It's not an office of good or charity or spiritual oneness of the flesh, or whatever you want to call it. It's an office of nature. Okay, so we know that impotence makes marriage null. You can't consent if you are physically impotent. All right. However, it says it says, what if whether the conjugal act necessarily requires the ejaculation of semen produced in the testicles? So they just got to get right down to it, man. There's a lot of this kind of stuff in the church where they've got to answer specific questions, and saints too. So, do you need seed, or do you just need seminal fluid and the nuts and bolts? Is that all you need for good? Okay. So now our vasectomy is being turned into good right before your very eyes. Watch this. So regarding the first, affirmative. So impotence equals you can't consent. Okay. If you're impotent, you can't consent. However, if you have taken your seed away voluntarily, you can consent, because it says does the conjugal act require seed? And the answer is no, it doesn't require seed. So you can now get your vasectomy because, listen, it's real simple. You no longer need to have procreation primary. It's because what is the seed there for? I don't know. It's to make a baby. That's what it's for. But if that is no longer primary, one only needs to be open to it, but it doesn't have to be oriented toward, then you don't need the seed. What do you need that for? You don't have to have it, because it's, actually you could probably have more love, quote unquote, if you don't, right? Right? Just ask any homo. Okay. Now, you don't need this procreation. So what am I getting at? Let's look at the 1917 code, matrimonial consent. Now, so what is consent? What is the object of consent? Didn't we find out that the object was good of the spouses? Remember, you heard that from the new code? Matrimonial consent is an act of the will, yes, by which each party gives and accepts. What do they give and accept? A perpetual, so a lifetime and exclusive right. They give a right over the body. There's my body. I know what that is, and I know what giving the right to it is. For acts, what do you give for acts which are of themselves? That means no love required, all by themselves, suitable for the generation of what? Of love? No, of children. That's what the acts, the rights are for. That's all it's for. Legally, okay? And then the new code, we have matrimonial consent. They give and accept each other. So they no longer have to give and accept the right over the body for acts. They give and accept each other. Now, you can't change marriage. You can call it anything you want, but you can't change the essence of marriage. So this new code changes zero. However, in legal terms, the practice is this means we have to have good of the spouses. And if good of the spouses is required and procreation can be secondary if you have grave cause, then good of the spouses is primary by default. But you can only have one primary purpose anyway. So if you're going to have good of the spouses, it's got to be primary. It's just the way it works. Even if they don't say it, even if Cardinal Burke says good of the spouses is secondary, it doesn't matter. It's primary, or it's not essential. Whatever is essential is primary. And as I said, because procreation is discernment, okay? It's procreation is now secondary. Anything you have to be open to is secondary. Anything you have to be oriented to is primary. Do you have to be oriented toward love and marriage? Yeah. That's nowadays you do, apparently. So back to this. All right. Okay. Okay. So in the audience granted the undersigned prefect. Yeah. So that's it. It's just two lines. Look, this is the key thing of all of this. Do you have to have seed? No. But the real important piece that we're getting at is as I said in the beginning, what if you do it to yourself versus what if it's done to you? What if you divorce your spouse rather than getting divorced forced upon you? Is there a difference? Yeah. Whoever initiates the divorce is guilty until proven innocent. Whoever neuters themselves via the vasectomy is guilty until proven innocent. Okay, so like I said, stuff used to happen involuntarily in World War II and things like that, or who knows, it could happen today. But I think that was the only point I wanted to make on that. Let's go to, here's some more stuff about Nazis, all right? So this is more AI. Private reply to the bishop in the Nazi era sterilizations. These sterilizations were legally imposed under the 3345 German eugenics laws. All right. The men affected did not choose these sterilizations. They were forced by the state, often under threat or coercion. The Holy Office reply, therefore, addressed men sterilized against their will. This is important because, like I said, it totally matters. And again, today it doesn't. Divorce is something that happens and God hates divorce. Wrong, 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 wrong. If you hate your spouse, you put them away. That's what the Bible says, and there's one guilty and one innocent. So it matters how your vasectomy came about. Was it voluntary or involuntary? They don't discern that. They don't talk about that in the 1977 decree. It's like saying, if you get killed, murder, because people die, murder is fine. It depends on who's doing the murdering. You know what I mean? The Holy Office's reply addressed to men sterilized against their will. It is the emphasis. Its emphasis was on canonical capacity. The fact that involuntary sterilization does not render a man impotent in the sense of preventing him from marrying. So that's a little bit of editorializing. It does render a man impotent, but they say in the sense of preventing him from marrying. This is an example of how AI is radically PC. DNA, top to bottom. You have to be careful. They are always trying to make everything modernist. They try really hard. They would say St. Thomas Aquinas is a modernist. The stuff they would say. So you have to be careful. You can use it as research, but they're editorializing. So, impotence does prevent one from marrying, but nowadays impotence is primarily emotional impotence or impotence for good. Okay. But they say key point, or non-voluntary sterilizations. I go back and forth with AI sometimes, and I try to pin it down, try to checkmate it, and it keeps slithering away and then burying you and stuff. You've probably tried that before yourself. Okay. Other private replies, absence of testicle surgical conditions. These cases were generally medical or congenital conditions, such as men missing one or both. All right, yeah. Some might have been surgical removals. Yeah, medical necessity. Okay, so these replies were not about voluntary sterilization for conceptions. The focus was again on whether man retained canonical capacity for intercourse, and no, capacity for marriage. That's it. Okay, medically necessary or congenital conditions, not willful. So, like we said in the beginning, this is the 1977 thing. Where did I see it? Oh, here. Yeah. Hey guys, we have always held that those who have undergone a vasectomy are not impeded from marriage. We've always held that, but you know what I'm pointing out? They're not referring to voluntary. They're referring to involuntary. So, little sleight of hand there, a little bit of deception, if you ask me. Okay. While I'm thinking about all this voluntary versus involuntary stuff, I'm going to come back to this Roman Rota judge here in a minute. Some of you know Anne there. He's liberal, man. He's done a lot of annulment stuff too. But let's look at Casti Connubii real quick, and then we'll go back. Where is it? Where'd it go? Okay, this is Casti from the French translation of the Latin, of the English, whatever you want to call it. It's in a bunch of languages, and this is the French one, which makes it helpful. So, okay, in 1977, the CDF is saying, look, if you have taken your seed and removed it, but everything else is intact, you can validly marry. Wait. Casti 59. Nor should spouses who exercise their rights according to sound and natural reason, which is venial stuff, like you got to be in your mind thinking I'm trying to get pregnant or I want pregnancy, or be accused of unnatural acts. Those are mortal or grave. Okay. So how do we get unnatural acts? If for natural reasons, either due to temporary circumstances or certain physical defects, a new life cannot result. Temporary circumstances are the monthly cycle. So if things are going up and down in the month, fertility has nothing to do with it. All right, that's totally natural reason. Or certain physical defects, like they talked about in the 1977 decree, which is stuff that happened to you maybe involuntarily, but or not, involuntarily, but defects which you defected yourself, you are now committing an unnatural act. A conjugal act with a vasectomy is unnatural. That's mortal sin. You can never do it. Can't do it. No. Back to where we were going. Let's look at a little bit of where all this liberalization on sterilization comes from, because we know that marriage is for babies. Everyone knows that, don't they? And that's the primary purpose, which means it's the only essential purpose. So how can you cut the babies out and call marriage good with vasectomy? How do we get that to happen? It happened through Vatican II saying marriage is a love contract. That's how it happened. So now we no longer have, we've replaced the telos of procreation with the telos of quote unquote love. Enter the judge, N.A., in 1967. Those were good times. I was 1 year old. Key passages from translation and then on the sterilization and consent. Blah, 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 blah. Translation, sterility in itself neither removes nor vitiates matrimonial consent. That's right. You don't have to be, fertility doesn't make, okay, so if you're infertile or whatever, you can still get married as long as you can do the conjugal act. So he's saying, look, if you're sterile, what's the big deal? So if you make yourself sterile or whatever, we're not, we're gonna go with A, then B, then B, then C, and we're gonna get this done. It has to be an accident, like we just saw in Casti 59. It has to be not involuntary, extrinsic to you, something that happens, like getting struck by lightning. But if you burn yourself voluntarily, that's sinful. But if lightning strikes you, okay. So this is more similar stuff. It's like to the divorce. Hey, if divorce happens, divorce isn't a sin in and of itself. That's like saying vasectomy isn't a sin. It's just the abortion is. That's the problem. That's how dumb this is. No, it matters how you got to that sterility. Where did the sterility come from? Was it an inside job or an outside job? They don't talk about that. And immediately establishes that sterilization is not an impediment and does not automatically affect validity. Yeah, duh, that's right. But now he says factum, blah, 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 blah. Translation. The fact of sterilization is only an indication of the will and not the will itself. Well, that sounds, this guy is a Roman road a judge and I'm just a bumpkin. So what do I know? This must be really tricky. There must be something here. This sentence is one of the most cited lines from the decision. Anne is rejecting the practice of treating vasectomy as juridical proof of exclusion. All right, I'm going to explain why this is a big old problem and how it makes no sense. Hang on a minute. Okay, so what this is saying is that sterilization is only an indication of the will. In other words, somebody doesn't want a baby to happen. Somebody wants you sterilized, but it's not. It doesn't indicate that the person who is sterilized did so for reasons of not wanting a baby. That's true. However, you have to. People who have got a vasectomy did it for a reason, and that reason is only so that they couldn't have kids. I mean, what else is there? That's it. So this is a little bit disingenuous. We don't know why their sterilization happened, so we can't prove anything. Okay. Anna's rejecting the practice of treating vasectomy as juridical proof of exclusion. Exclusion of the seed. That's what it is. This is why all vasectomies automatically said no consent, because the object of consent is the right over the body for acts suitable for the generation of children. All right. So he's trying to say, no, you can't do that anymore because it doesn't prove you are excluding children, because we don't know why you got your vasectomy. We don't know. So we can't just say, you know something though, that people who got their vasectomy against their will, I don't think they were still allowed to get married, even, you know, back in the 30s and 40s or whatever. It didn't automatically get rid of validity, but it does automatically get rid of validity if you're the one who did it to yourself. Okay. What must be excluded for invalidity? That's a great question. It used to be real simple, procreation, but now it's love and procreation. Apparently not even procreation anymore. Okay. Ad matrimonium, blah, blah, blah. Translation: for a marriage to be null, there is required a positive act of the will, excluding the right to acts, which are per se, that means of themselves, ordered to the generation of offspring. That's right. There must be required a positive act of the will. Okay. So what's the problem with that? Okay. So the exclusion must concern the right, not the result. Yeah. You can't control what happens, but if you get a vasectomy, you are controlling what happens. You're circumscribing fertility. Physical sterility does not exclude the right, does not impede the right, whatever. Physical sterility. But if you do it to yourself versus letting it happen or something happens to you, that's totally different things. It determines the will. Distinction between past and marital, okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, a prior will to sterilize oneself does not necessarily coincide with matrimonial will. Okay, so he is saying this is the heart of the correction. That's right. So just because you wanted to be sterile and you got a vasectomy back in 1979 doesn't mean in 1984 you can't get married because you feel differently today. So they're saying it all depends on intention and not nature. That's like saying abortion isn't wrong if I'm trying to love my baby, okay? Divorce isn't wrong if I'm trying to do God's will with this. No, it's objectively wrong because you're cutting stuff apart. You're cutting your family apart, whatever. Okay, a prior will to sterilize oneself doesn't necessarily coincide with matrimonial will. So it don't matter because you can't provide what you did it to yourself. You can't change your mind on that later and say, well, I don't mean it now, because you did it to yourself. You have to live with that. You can't provide what you are consenting to, which is the right over the body for acts suitable for generation of children, because you did it to yourself. So it's like saying, yeah, I can do this sin, but I can just take it back later. This is the heart of the correction. Anna insists tribunals must not assume he chose sterilization, therefore he excluded children in his marriage. Hang on a second. This is totally weird. Otherwise, you're saying I can just sterilize myself and then just 5 minutes later say, well, I guess I made a mistake, or I didn't like that, but I want to get married now. In other words, and I can still do the conjugal act? No. And I guess similarly, it's like, yeah, I'm going to consent to marriage, but then later I'm going to decide that I don't want this, and I can get an annulment, so I can just pretend everything I consented to isn't there anymore. It's the same kind of thing. So the main the main development here, the change, is he's saying that if you chose sterilization, you're out. But now they're saying, well, you choose it, but you can change your mind about how you feel. If you, it absolutely cannot work. Okay. Let me go back to that. Oh, by the way, if anybody want me to clarify anything in the comment section or whatever, I'm always good at that, and I will do so. So don't be shy on there, over there. And I'll take some likes too. That would be fine. Openness to life despite sterilization. Openness to life despite sterilization. That's what, like we talked about. Openness just means it's secondary. If it's no longer primary, you no longer have to have it. So it's all about how you feel or your will, not necessarily if you sterilized yourself. If a party enters marriage repentant regarding a past act and is prepared to accept offspring should it occur, true consent is present. Oh, really? Wait just a cotton picking minute. And this decision, this passage was decisive for later. Of course, jurisprudence is crazy. Jurisprudence means we can take what is natural and we can change it. That's where trans comes from. So if a party enters marriage repentant of regarding the past act, then they can consent. So again, marriage is an office of nature, not of charity or repentance or any of that kind of stuff. If you can't bring to the table what is required, you can't consent. And if it was done willfully, you have to live with the otherwise you can it's as simple as I self-identify as a 5-year-old, therefore I can go to kindergarten, you know what I mean? Or I self-identify as an 8-year-old, therefore I can get my Social Security. I self-identify as no vasectomy, therefore I can get married because that's how I self-identify now. If you did it to yourself, it's done. You can't go back or you can't change it. The real heart of this 1977 change is the change of the object of consent, the change of nature, the bending of nature with words in a non-infallible statement from Vatican II that marriage is a love contract. So you only need to be open to life. Okay, so is prepared to accept offspring should it occur. In other words, you only have to be open to it because it's only secondary now. And this is why you can have a change of heart and make that okay. Because it's something, it doesn't have to happen. It is no longer essential to the conjugal act because it's no longer the object of consent. Even though they pay lip service to it, it's not. Rejection of automatic presumptions. Let's see what he's got to say. General presumptions drawn from sterilization alone cannot be admitted. Now he's saying you can't do what you guys have always done, which is saying that if they got a vasectomy, they can't consent. That's what always was happened because you've taken you're denying your spouse the right to acts which are suitable for the generation of children. And you did that. You can't just say, I'm sorry. You've destroyed your purpose. You've destroyed your chance for marriage because of what you did. So general presumption drawn from sterilizations alone cannot be admitted. Okay. General presumptions can't really ever be admitted because you have to find out. And I think they did find out whether if you got to prove that your sterilization was involuntary, but if you can't do that, so it's not a general presumption. And I think no one really, it's kind of hard to say, I got a vasectomy, but it was the Nazis that they done did it. I didn't do it. it's not hard to find that stuff out. Final juridical conclusion. It is not established that good of offspring was excluded. So if you got a vasectomy, you aren't excluding good of the offspring. Got that? How does that make any sense? Well, they're saying, in my mind at the time of the wedding, I really decided I really did want good of offspring. You already cut that ship has sailed. The horse has left the barn. You can't get married if you can't give what's on the contract, and you did it to yourself. You willfully messed yourself up. So that was the change, okay, and that got it. Then that created all sorts of stuff. Well, what about vasectomy and all? And then and this is why everything has been this way for 2,000 years until 1977. It started to catch up. All these, you have to start changing all the puzzle pieces once you move one little piece, which says procreation is secondary. This is another decision in 1984 when there is more love in the room than ever before. Okay, post-Vatican II under the developing 1983 code. Principle established the inability to generate offspring due to sterilization does not invalidate consent unless accompanied by the rejection of the procreative meaning of marriage itself. Not the procreative purpose, because it obviously does. So what is the procreative meaning of marriage? Well, we'll have to talk to Christopher West about that. It's the procreative meaning is all this inseparable unitive and procreative stuff and how you have to have love in the room and all that. So as long as you're totally about love and everything, then sterilization does not invalidate consent. What they're basically saying, this is by the way, like I said in the beginning, it's about if NFP is legal, we have to legalize everything that avoids procreation. That's all that's going on here. They're backfilling, they're retrofitting marriage to accommodate NFP. Therefore, divorce isn't a sin, annulment's on demand, vasectomy is okay. By the way, if you can get married with a vasectomy, there's nothing wrong with getting a vasectomy because you're fulfilling your obligations to marriage. So what the heck's the problem? And if you can get a vasectomy, you can do everything else. That's why all Catholics contracept, because NFP says you don't have to pursue procreation. That's why. It only makes sense. This is why liberals will come out and start saying, no, we're going to have satanic storybook hour with our trans whatever the heck, because who's to say it's unnatural? Okay. And who's to say you have a right to your kid? It's logical step after logical step. We're going to have satanic prayers in the state capitol because of freedom of religion. Logical step after logical. Then what are you going to say about it? No, forget religious freedom. We want Catholic truth or nothing. That's all you can say about it, ultimately. Stankiewicz summarized earlier Rodel teaching, effectively closed the door on automatic invalidations. When they say automatic invalidations, what they're saying is if you sterilized yourself, you can no longer say, I'm here to get married, even though I sterilized myself. This is to accommodate NFP, willful sterilization, while accepting the meaning of and open to life, etc. That's what I just pointed out. Right. So this whole thing happened incrementally, starting with the 60s. And then they just one thing to the next, and then it became institutionalized. Once you institutionalize all this stuff, you start okaying the divorce, the annulments, the vasectomies, all the sterilizations. It's really hard to go back on any of that. Here's a quote from Patrick Madrid, who, by the way, blocked me, and I got more stuff I need to talk about from Patrick Madrid, but he does have one good quote here from Aquinas that he pointed out. Long before modern debates, St. Thomas Aquinas explained why intention cannot redefine an act. Good point. Let's see. An action is judged morally by its object, not by the sincerity of the motive behind it. A good intention cannot transform a disordered act into a good one. Yeah, so I'm going to murder you for a really good reason, therefore it's not murder. No. Murder is what it is. Killing is different. Murder is what it is. So I'm going to have an abortion for a really good reason. I'm going to sterilize myself for a really good reason. Can't. The good of the spouses is specifically an object of marriage as defined in... Oh, wait, we already talked about that. All right, hang on a second. Okay, before I forget, we got to go... we really should go over the teaching of the church regarding the theological note of this 1977 decree. It's authentic, ordinary magisterium, and that means it's non-infallible teaching. That's what it is, kind of like an encyclical, all right? I put it all down. So we're supposed to have religious submission of intellect and will, okay, but we also have to use our intellect to see if it defies nature or what's wrong with it, if there is anything. So it's not infallible is the point. That's the main thing to take away from this. So just remember that. It's authentic, ordinary magisterium. That means it's not infallible. This is why we can pick at it a little bit if we need to get some things straight about how if you have chosen sterility, you cannot choose marriage. And no video about vasectomy would be complete without bringing in Father Tad from the National Catholic Bioethics Center. So this is where the super smarty pants, you can't touch me type people are dwelling. And Father Tad is right in there with them. And he's the man. And everyone thinks he's the man. So everyone goes to him. And who are you going to say anything against him? I did go back and forth with him on email and kind of checkmated him. And he wouldn't talk anymore because he wasn't making sense. This stuff cannot make sense. Let's go to his video a little bit where he talks about vasectomy. Okay, and take it away.
Was a really, really key piece.
He's talking about
to the sort of unraveling of a lot of other related moral
contraception
issues.
was a key piece, yeah.
For example, if you do contraception, you are basically saying, well, I mean, what is contraception? It's sex without babies, right?
Of course, what does that sound like? It's like NFP, which now is good, now is normal, now is natural, so it's fine. It's NFP is just conception.
Well, if it's okay to have sex without babies, what about if you flip it around? How about having babies without sex?
I guess you could on a natural level because there's no if nature is no longer part of it, because if you don't have to have babies, then you don't have to have the act either to get the baby because it's no longer bound by nature. So this is what I say is the connection between IVF, test tube babies, and NFP. NFP removes nature from the act. Therefore, as long as the ends justify the means now. And the ends are we don't want a baby, but we want the act, which requires a rejection of nature. So if we want the baby without the act, requires a rejection of nature, but we're already rejecting nature, so who cares? It's all Catholic, right?
What's that? That's in vitro fertilization, right? That's making test tube babies. So you see, as soon as you separate the unitive and the procreative, you'll...
Whoa! Right. As soon as you separate the unitive and the procreative. The unitive and the procreative, what? What is the unitive? He just said. He is saying one thing, and then he says another thing 5 seconds later. He's saying the unitive is the physical nuts and bolts of the conjugal act. No, that's not what the unitive is. The unitive, according to the Spirit of Vatican II, is the love feeling of mutual submission, okay? Of no more marital debt, just marital consent every time, okay? That's the unitive, okay? Oh, shoot, someone's calling. Hang on a minute. Okay, so I think we nailed that down enough. The unitive from the procreative. You have to say what is what is unitive, and if he's trying to say in one hand it's the physical act, but then on the other hand he says it's the emotional connection, that kind of thing. So it's one or the other, okay, and it can't be both. There is no such. It's like saying the conjugal act must be physical. That makes no sense. Of course it is. Okay, let's
You
see what
open
else
up
we got.
a Pandora's box, and that was something that happened very quickly in the wake of contraception. And I'll go one step further. How about the situation where you ask the question, what does contraception do to women? What does it say to women? Contraception neuters women.
Just like NFP.
Right? It says you're not going to be fertile. The reality of your fertility as a woman is not that important.
Okay, sound familiar? Anybody? That's why we can have vasectomy. That's why we can say you can get married if you have a vasectomy that you did to yourself, because it's not that important.
What's important is, I don't know, whatever people will say, getting women in the workplace, or getting women to do this, or getting women to do that.
Like I said, because if NFP is okay, then vasectomy, that's all you can. It's obvious.
All right, so women, what are we saying when we do that? We're saying women are just another kind of man.
Bingo. Hello. Welcome to trans. Women are just another type of man. If we can say you don't have to get pregnant. That's all. There is no more difference anymore. That's where it comes from. And he is saying this comes from contraception. Correct. However, NFP is contraception and they're promoting it. So the feminism is totally inside, quote, the church right now. And this guy is like on the top of the heap. He's like Mr. Bioethicist saying, yeah, man. NFP is great, but contraception turns women into men, but NFP doesn't.
And it's the men that really count. So you notice that's already moving in the direction of transgender.
And it's the men that really count. Yeah, that's the way that everyone wants to be. Yeah, listen.
Saying to women that your femininity is not actually that valuable and important.
And it doesn't even have to be natural anymore.
And it's hugely important. It's essential for the right order of everything.
The essence, that's right. Fertility has to be there. Oh, really? Maybe it doesn't. What about for grave cause? Do you have to have fertility for grave cause? See? Not about nature anymore. Vasectomy is okay now.
And then women start saying they want to be men, and men start saying they want to be women, and etc. So all of these things, at least in the psyche of the modern culture that we're a part of, are connected, I believe, back to the decision to allow and to use and rely on contraception.
Couldn't be more correct. Exactly. But as I said, he's the one who's promoting the contraception with the NFP. They're just saying, no, it's not really. And now he's going to explain why you can get by with a little vasectomy too. He has to allow it. So it's like saying, abortion's bad, but for grave cause, you can kill your baby. So what do we do? That's all how crazy this is. And everyone's like, wow. Oh man. That's why I say Planned Parenthood is open to life. I call NFP, all you call it is parenthood planning. That's all it is. Anyway, let's get to the next clip, 105. I think it's at 105. All right, hang on a second. Here, boom. Okay. What's he got to say?
Maybe about the case of the vasectomy.
Oh, yeah. Here we go.
If a man, let's say that he gets married to his wife, they have a couple kids, and then he decides, maybe unilaterally, that he's going to get a vasectomy, or maybe not. But then there's a realization, oh dear, why did I mutilate my own body?
See, this is the whole thing that came with the 1977 decree. I'm getting a vasectomy, but then you can say, boy, I made a mistake. So now what do I do? Well, what he's going to say is you can do the conjugal act because we don't need to have the seed anymore. NFP says we don't need the seed. In fact, we don't want the seed. So it's cool. That's how, okay. So if we can do vasectomy, then all contraception is fine as long as you feel in your heart you made it. It's not right. It made a mistake.
Here. and there's regret and repentance. Should they abstain?
Should they abstain? Well, why would you even ask that question? Should they abstain if they have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on Tuesday? Nobody asked that because it is irrelevant. It doesn't make any difference. Should they abstain if they sterilize themselves? Well, what is the purpose of the conjugal act? It's love and bonding, and you have to be open to life. As long as you're open to life, and all vasectomies are open to life, what's the problem? There's none. So how can you say it's a sin? You know, you mutilating yourself, if that's the only sin, well, then a tattoo is too. You know, it's like, well, we don't have to be, if we don't, you know, we can, there's always a chance you can get pregnant with vasectomy. So it's perfectly, no, you cannot circumscribe 1% the procreative power. Nothing. Zero. Hang on.
When this matter is brought to the confessional, many priests will say to the man who had the vasectomy something like this. They'll say, well, you clearly have repented and you understand the wrongness of what you did, but you also realize now that there's, in a sense, no consequences. When you have sex, there's no chance of pregnancy because of the vasectomy. So maybe you should ask yourself.
So, yeah, you have to ask. Why don't you ask yourself, what is the marriage contract? Why don't you ask yourself, what do you have the right to do? Let's go back to the beginning, shall we? What do you have the right to do in the marriage contract? She has the right to acts which are suitable for the generation of children. A vasectomy act is not suitable for the generation of children. An NFP act is not suitable for the generation of children because it is deliberately governed by sterility. No matter how you feel about it or if you think it's wrong or any of that stuff, you have done. So vasectomy is simply permanent NFP. That's all it is. You can't get out of it. You did it. All right. That's all it is. It's just another flavor of permanent NFP. Okay. Go back, Father Tad. Where are you? Shoot. Over here. Okay, here we go.
And in your prayer to God, ask whether you and your wife should bring in some discipline of self-restraint.
So you could diet, you could fast, you could eat all your vegetables, you could bring in discipline to help justify your guilt, to make this is nuts. He's saying it's not intrinsically evil to get a vasectomy and continue to have relations. You just have to try to impose him. This is what's totally weird. Now he's going to say, basically, pretend you're doing NFP, because if we'd say NFP is fine, then we can say vasectomy is. Listen to what he says. He says, just impose an NFP schedule on your vasectomy to try to assuage some of your guilt. If I were smarter, there's more I could say about this, but it's dumb enough on its face. I think you guys can see that. Anyone want to comment on it? Like I always say, don't be shy in the comments section.
Maybe along the lines of charting her cycle, noting her infertile periods, and together deciding to abstain during those fertile periods.
Oh, God. Oh, it's so crazy. Give yourself some NFP if you've already NFP'd yourself permanently because you're guilty. But what are we going to say? No more conjugal acts? There's going to be a riot. Oh, no, because, again, if we don't have to, if you can do NFP and try to not get pregnant, why can't I just do vasectomy and try to not get pregnant? It's the same thing. What's the problem? It's natural. The act is the same. Their seminal fluid is the same. And we're keeping the seed away from the egg. That's the same as NFP, and we're open to life. That's the same as NFP. So what's of course you can get married. Of course you can get a vasectomy, and then, so you almost like you could say, I can get a vasectomy for grave cause, but then you have to be, then you can't have babies ever. So it's like a permanent NFP. Okay, enough said. Let's keep going.
As if you still had your fertility for your own spiritual growth. Now, that's a difficult proposal, and the confessors won't usually require that of their penitents, but they'll offer it sometimes. And I think, it is a helpful spiritual discipline to realize that you did something very, very serious to your own body here.
It's serious. How about sinful? Okay, and why is it sinful? Because you've circumscribed the primary purpose, which is no longer primary when love entered the room in 1965. So what are we going to say? We're going to kind of go through the Catholic motions, but not actually be Catholic anymore on this thing. And again, like I always say, the over at the National Center for Catholic Bioethics or whatever, it's like, who are you mere nobody, to question them? But when Father Tad will email you, but if you make a good case, he basically he bails out because he cannot sustain his position
in an almost irreversible way. Now, the question of reversal will sometimes come up. Does a man have a moral duty to undo a vasectomy?
Well, if you have a, quote, moral duty to increase and multiply, then you could argue you do, because you have to have kids, right? Don't you have to produce babies? And the answer is no, you don't have to. Besides, you can't make people do crazy surgeries and stuff, but.
And the church has always said no, because this involves a second surgery, which comports its own set of risks. It's not required, but the man could, on his own, make the decision that he will try to reverse the vasectomy. Sometimes you try and it fails, depending on how the vasectomy
Yeah, whatever.
Done.
Let's get to the one. We got to get to the 108.30 mark. Let's skip ahead a little bit. Hang on a second. Sorry. 107, 108.15. Close enough.
Forward
Here we go.
As best you can.
So just to clarify, abstinence is not required
Correct.
in those
Abstinence
cases.
would not be required in those cases.
What has kept the Catholic Church from...
Abstinence is not required. Oh, wait. Abstinence is not required in what cases? Sorry about that. Hold on a second. Hold on just a second. 108.02. What did he just say?
By God, you lost your fertility. Whether it was disease, whether it was you went off to Iraq and you got shot in such a way that you lost your fertility. Whatever it is, you just accept that.
See, that's what I was talking about earlier, when things happen out of your control. Extrinsic to you. Okay? You lose your fertility, but it's not your doing. You're not the one who chose to violate nature. It happened. So it's an accident.
And move forward as best you can.
So just to clarify, abstinence is not required
Correct.
in those
Abstinence
circumstances.
would not be required in those cases.
Correct. And Aquinas says the same thing. If there's something going on that's a permanent problem, that's involuntary, or you didn't do it, because someone has the right, perpetual right over the body, they do that, okay? You're allowed to. But you can't give yourself a defect and say, now I'm going to give myself the conjugal act. You're not going to fool God like that.
What has kept the Catholic Church from really teaching this strongly?
Yes, so what has kept the church from teaching this?
NFP is what's kept the church, quote, from teaching this. It's just, that's it. Once you bring NFP in, your law is garbage, because you are saying something that called love is now your object of consent, which can't be defined. Therefore, we can't really talk about it, which is why Father Tad won't answer certain questions on email. You don't believe me? Go ahead. I'll put his email in the show notes. You can try him. He won't talk anymore to me.
Much too young.